Good morning, mommies. Welcome wherever you are. If you're in homes, if you're on the internet, we just welcome you to another lesson with the Home Club, Hearts of Moms Encouraged. We've been in a series the last month or so with What About Me? Who Am I as a Mom? And we've been talking about the role that we have as a mom and raising our children and being married and how it's all a new season. And sometimes it's difficult, but God really gives us everything that we need. In the last week, we talked about how do we love this man I'm married to. Now what? We talked about how difficult it is to really love and respect the man that we're married to because we come from different family backgrounds. We have different ways of doing things. We have different personalities and love languages and different feelings about money and children and where we live and what we do. It causes all kinds of conflicts. But we also talked about that your husband is God's provision for you to grow into the woman that God wants you to be. And today we're going to be talking about a subject that is sometimes difficult. It was very difficult for me in my early parts of marriage. And we're not going to go to that yet, because what we're going to do is we're going to go back and look at what was our homework last week to encourage us with how do we love this man we're married to. And if you remember, we talked about how the 5 C's that we were to really take to heart in marriage, about commitment, that we are to be committed to our husbands, that it's a covenant and not a contract, that we need to be communicative with our husband. We really need to learn how to speak his language and how to listen for understanding and not just listen to respond. We talked about how he needs our caring. Even though he seems like he doesn't really need very much, he does need our heart. He needs our caring. He needs our companionship for him to really feel like he's an important person, more than your girlfriends or your parents or your children. And then we talked about confidentiality. Remember, we do not want to be dishing our husbands to other people, to our parents, to anyone around us. We want to keep what our husband shares with us confidentially. We also talked about 5 relationship builders that we wanted to work on, and that's what part of your homework was, that your relationship builders were to prepare your home, to really have visual rest in your home, to be praying and having peace and preparation before your husband comes home. Now, I know that sounds so old-fashioned, but if you're not happy and everything's a mess when your husband comes in, there's no peace. You're just scrambling all around, and it's not comfortable for him or your children. So we want to be preparing. We prepare for everything else. Why don't we prepare for our husband to come home? We talked about how we want to greet our husband. We want him to know that he's important. Yes, I know many of you are out working and you want to greet each other, but as your husband walks in the door, really treat him as the man that God has provided for you. Greet him. Tell him you're happy he's home. We also talked about talk time, that this really helps your children know that your marriage is the most important relationship in your family. It gives them confidence that you're doing well. And that talk time can be when he comes home after he's decompressed, sometime in the evening, for your children to be able to see you two making a conscious decision to connect. We also talked about eating together. Families that eat together have stronger relationships and family connections. And I know it's hard with all the activities, but really being purposeful and trying to eat together. And then date night with your husband. And again, date night doesn't have to be something that every week you have to do and it's scheduled. If that's how you work, that's great. But a date night could be you two sitting on the couch playing a game or watching a movie together. It's just intentional time to be together. Remember how we've talked that women, we like to be eye to eye. We want to just look into another woman's soul. Our husbands sometimes feel a little more uncomfortable with that, and they like to be shoulder to shoulder. They talk more when they're doing things. Even when they're watching football or when they're reading the newspaper or whatever, they like to have us shoulder to shoulder. And our homework was to think about one area you'd like to work on in your marriage. What can you do this week to begin to change your heart, attitude, and actions to create more connection with your husband? And then you were to take one relationship builder and really be intentional this week. And remember, we're not just doing the home club for you to hear, we're doing the home club for you to have changes in your marriage and in your family. So don't just be hearers, be doers. So if you haven't done it, go back and look at the other videos and do your homework. That's when real change happens. And that leads us to our topic today. But before we do, let's go to the Lord. Father, I thank you so much for the time that we have together. However, people are listening. Lord, we know that you want us to have wonderful families. You want us to be fulfilled, and you want us to grow. And Lord, as we talk about that word that most women do not like, I ask that you'd open all of our hearts and that we would be hearers through your Spirit to know that you designed us and your design is perfect. So Lord, just be with us as we talk about respecting our husbands. In Jesus' name. Again, we've been talking about how do I love this man I'm married to. And today we're talking about the word respect. That is not a popular word in our culture. If you look at any of the commercials on television, if you look on media, how are men portrayed? For the most part, they're portrayed as idiots. Most of the sitcoms are, men are just not quite that great, and women are wonderful. And then we wonder why we're having all the problems that we are having with marriages, with authority, with everything in our culture. So I want you to listen with open ears. Don't turn it off, just listen with open ears. When my husband and I got married, I felt like I was his absolute equal, and here I was, woman, and I was going to roar, and I was going to do things my own way. And you know what? I did that for a lot of years. And it didn't serve my husband, myself, or my family well. When I learned how God created us differently as man and woman, and think about this, it's the only relationship that we have. God says he makes man and woman in his image. It's the only two people who ever come together as one flesh. And you together co-create an image bearer of God. Think about that. Think about how a man and a woman come together as one. That's what God wants. He wants us to be one. But we have different roles. A man is different than a woman. But yet in our society, we've been told that women are exactly the same and we can do everything and anything a man can do. And you know what? We can. I think in a lot of ways, we can multitask and do things a lot better than our husbands do. But if you remember in the garden, Eve was the one that was deceived. She was the one the serpent came to and said, "Oh, really? Did God say? Oh, really?" She put doubt. The enemy put doubt in Eve's mind. And isn't that what happens to us today? We're always doubting. We're always questioning. I think that's why we deal with so much anxiety, because we don't really realize what our role is. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what is love and respect, and how is it different for a man and a woman, and then how do we respect our husbands. So let's first talk about what respect is. Respect is when you revere someone, when you honor and you have great admiration for someone. And love is more when you are cherishing someone, where you're more protecting, you're more being so involved with that person that that person feels very comfortable and very fulfilled. So when we think about respect and we think about love, this is not true across the board, but for the most part, men, literally their language, the language they speak is respect. And I've asked many men this: would you rather your wife love you or like you? What's interesting is most men will say, I want to be liked. Because remember, like is about being respected. Love is something that they don't relate to as much. Now, a lot of women, we want to be respected, but what we feel the most secure with is when we feel the love. It's like God created us for the attachment with children, to be able to talk to other women heart to heart. You know, you think about it, men do that, but that's not their language for the most part. Their language is more, I'm a man and I want to be respected. But because of our society now, a lot of men have been emasculated. And we want to raise our boys to respect women, and we want our boys to grow up to be strong men. And we're going to be talking about how we do that the next semester. But for now, we are talking about how do we start in our homes respecting our husbands so that we start that process for our children. In Ephesians 5, the Lord says that we are to be imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children, and live a life of love just as Christ loved us and gave himself for us. That's what God wants us to do, is to love one another. But he also says that we're to submit to one another out of reverence of Christ. So we are, in our marriage, we're to submit to one another. But God has created women as our husband's helpmate. If you think back to the garden, Adam was the first human that God made, but he said it was not good for him to be alone. He named all the animals, but he was alone. So God created a completion for him, a helpmate. And do you know what the word Eve means? It means life. And if you think about it, mommies, who brings life to our families? We do. We are the ones that bring that love and that life. So think about it. We as women have more influential power than we could ever imagine. So don't ever think that because we're our husband's helpmate that we're lower or we're a doormat. That is not it at all. We are just the ones that come and help our husband, because you know what? They need a lot of help. And you know that old saying, behind every great man is what? It's a great business, a great mind, a great whatever. No. Behind every great man is a great woman, because our men become what we believe about them. If you believe that your husband is a strong, courageous man, that's how he's going to end up. If you believe that he's never going to amount to anything and he's always going to disappoint you, that's what he's going to do. Because our husbands believe what we say about them. And in the rest of Ephesians 5, it says that therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And I love the next part. This mystery is profound. And I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Do you know that it doesn't say anywhere in the Bible for your husband to respect you? But it does say constantly that your husband is to love you like Christ loves the church. Your husband, that is his responsibility, is to love you. But we've always said he's not here today, so we have to do our part first. And we are commanded to respect our husbands. And again, in my early marriage, I didn't do this, and we had a lot of issues. We were always at odds because I didn't know how to respect my husband. I didn't think he was very respectable. So I was always undermining everything he was doing. And then when I learned that he's really like a little boy in so many ways. Your husbands are like scared little boys that they feel like they're going to fail and they're not going to measure up. But if you give your husband a vision of what a respectable man he is going to rise up and be that man. And as I started learning that maybe 20 years ago, 10 years into my marriage, my husband was like this, really, you believe in me? I'm good? And all of a sudden he started to come into his own manhood in a way that I'd never seen before. So before you disagree with this, try it and see how it works. So remember, we are to respect our husbands. And respecting is when we think about our husbands in a way of honor and revering. Think about somebody that you respect. Somebody that maybe it could be in business, it could be in your family, it could be in maybe official, But think about somebody that you respect. How do you look at them? That's how you need to look at your husband. And I hear so many times from women who say, well, my husband's just not very respectable and I just need to put him in his place. Well, if God commands us to respect him, then how should we treat him? The way you would treat any person that you highly respect. Because again, he's going to grow into be the man that you expect him to be. And our husbands were meant to be our providers and our protectors and really the leader of our homes. But we've gotten that upside down. And you look around us and this is not a popular discussion. But that's why I think our families are in a mess. And I will tell you, Dirk and I, if I would have continued living as though I was the one that was the one that needed all the respect and I was the one that kept dishing my husband, I truly do not believe that we would be married today. I really don't. And I have a lot of girlfriends who, as we talked and we prayed and we said this was our role, I have women friends who just said, I'm not doing it. And guess what? Without exception, every one of them are divorced. Without exception. So again, if you want to have a good marriage, I think we need to follow God's plan for what he's created us to be. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Remember that respect means to take notice of, to regard your husband with special attention, to prefer him, to honor him. If we're doing that, our husbands are going to notice. They are going to feel that there's something different in our home versus you just tolerating him as somebody who is in your house. Because marriages can come to that, where you're just two roommates living in a house raising kids. It happens before you know it. We have to be intentional to be pouring into our marriages and pouring into our husband. What happens a lot of times to women is that when our husbands disappoint us and we feel that they are not the men that we want them to be, we a lot of times will either ignore them, we'll kind of disregard them. It's like we almost just, they're present, but we don't consider them being present. And I believe that as women, we do three basic things. We either get so angry with our husband that we just kind of go, come on, wake up, how can you be this way? Or we start to withdraw. So we get angry, or we withdraw, or we have a pity party and go, only me. And think about it. What do we do when we feel angry, withdrawing, and pity? We usually go on social media because we want to zone out. And so what do we see? We see all these maybe old boyfriends, or we see someone else having fun, or maybe you've gotten some kind of contact with some people that were in your past. I don't know if this statistic is correct because I haven't verified it, but I was doing some research, and one researcher made the comment that a lot of marriages are breaking up because of social media, because people are connecting and being emotionally connected with people from their past. Now again, I haven't verified that, but if you're doing that, you are having an emotional affair. Don't do it. You cannot, if your heart is divided between two men, you're not present in your marriage. And really take the time to get rid of all the other stuff. If you have to, stay off of social media. Don't be comparing your husband or thinking there's somebody better out there. I have a girlfriend who's been married multiple times, and her marriages are no better than the first one. So don't believe the lie that another marriage is going to be what the best thing is for you. Think about when you get angry, when you withdraw, and when you all of a sudden have a pity party. Spend time. What's going on with you? What is it that's either a wound from your past that you don't feel is getting met, or something that's happening between you and your husband? Really start to pray about it and ask God, what can you do to start to open up the communication? And I want you to know that marriages, when you first get married and you have children, marriages are hard, but they get better. They really get better if you stick them out. We've been married for almost 33 years. We still go through hard times. We've gone through some hard times over the last couple months. And we've pushed in. We've pushed in. And we've had some anger. We've had some withdrawal. And we've had some self-pity. I don't know if he has, but I have. Like, really? Do I have to do this? But we've pushed in, and now I can tell you, we are in a good place. Now, we're going to hit some hard places again, but we're not going to give up. We're going to push in to really make our marriage better. And it takes time and effort. You know, we will work out, we'll push ourselves, and we'll do whatever it takes to get our body in shape. Spend the same amount of time and effort pushing in and making your marriage work. You know, marriages don't just happen, they are made. So let's move to number 3. How do I respect the man I'm married to? What are some things that you can do? And as most of you know, I love acronyms, and RESPECT is no different because it helps to remind me of how do I respect my husband. So R is for respect, E is for esteem, S is for that word, sex, P is for pardon, E is for encouragement, C for connection, and T for time. Let's break all these down. Now, you may come up with different acronyms for respect. Do it. If you come up with other words, you put it down of what's going to work for you. But these are ones that have helped me when I look at Dirk and I go, how am I doing? Am I forgiving him? Am I encouraging him? Am I really spending time connecting with him? Am I giving him my undivided attention? So these are words that play in my mind to help remind me if I'm respecting my husband. So when we look at the respect part, remember that the very first part of that is looking at your husband as somebody that you honor and you esteem. And even if you don't, then you find things that you loved and liked about him before you got married and start writing him down and asking the Lord to change your heart. Because when we get disappointed and we get angry and withdraw and have self-pity, all of a sudden we can only think about everything we hate about our husbands. And we just go, we can even look at him with such disdain and go, really? I can't stay married to this man. But you know what? That's a lie. God has put you together, and don't believe that you're to be separated. Work on it. Dig in. Get help. Do whatever you need. So first start with R, with respecting. There are at least 2 or 3 things that you can respect about your husband. And that moves us to the E, which is esteem. If you're respecting your husband, then you're esteeming him. Esteem means that you, again, are giving honor. You are telling him that he is somebody really important. And when we're esteeming someone, we're building them up. We are regarding them as somebody who is better than other people in our life, better than our friends, better than our children. Because remember, our children are going to be gone. And so many women my age are getting divorced because they don't have anything in common with their husbands. They've just spent their whole time raising kids, and now they look at each other and go, we don't even know each other anymore. So work on your marriage, because divorce is something that keeps on giving, and you want to stay married for a lifetime. You want to speak in an esteeming way about your husband. To your friends, you want to tell your friends what a great man you're married to. I've said this before if you've listened to any of the other videos, but when you have an attitude in your heart that you really don't like your husband, do you know that he knows? He knows. You don't have to say a word. And if you've been dishing him to your friends, he just feels it. But if you come home and you have been esteeming him and you're proud of your husband and you're building him up to your friends, when you walk in the door, you have a totally different spirit. And he knows it. Because remember, we're spiritual beings and we feel what's around us more than what's said. When you're esteeming your husband, one thing to remember, if you are verbally disrespecting him, you are tearing your house down with your own hands. You are literally tearing your house down with your own hands. So when you're thinking about what you can say, you know, your mom probably said, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That's the same with your husband. Now, if you're working on issues, then of course you're going to be talking about those things, but I'm talking on a daily basis. You're not saying things like, oh, yeah, I can't ever depend on you. You never take out the trash. You're lazy. You're this, you're that. You don't name call. Your husband will become the man you believe he is. And then we come to respect, esteem, and sex. This is an area I have not done well in my life, and I'm not proud of it. I always felt like I was going to have sex when I felt connected to my husband, when he was treating me well and everything was going well, and I would hold out on him. And he says to me now, when I ask him, what are some hard places in our marriage? What are some things that you wish would be different? And he will always say to me, Sharon, you've been a great wife in so many ways, but he said, physically is something that's been really hard for me. And I now have tried to be different. But remember, men have sex to connect. Women want connection and then have sex. So in the Bible it says that the only time that we are not to have sex and be submissive to each other is if we're praying and fasting. That's the only time. And I think that's interesting that that's the only time, is that if we are giving ourselves to prayer and fasting. So if you're praying and fasting for 60 days, then good. But if you're not, then really think about it. And I have to tell you, we got to a place where we were not connecting physically, so much so that my husband felt he just felt rejected. That I had to start lighting a candle by our bed, because he wasn't approaching me anymore. And so I would light a candle, and what it meant was, we're open for business. And I know that sounds kind of funny, but if you've been in a place where maybe you haven't connected physically, then do something to bring yourself back together. If you have to pray during the time. But over time, your husband will respond better to you. But we have to be the ones that move first. If we're waiting for our husbands to move, most of the time it's not going to happen, because we are the emotional ones. So don't hold out on your husband. If you have to, talk about it. Come up with some strategies that will work. But do not use sex as a power control. I did, and it did not work well for me. And now I really try to be available to my husband. And I will tell you, there was a mentor that I had that I respected her marriage more than anybody I've ever known. You know, they're now in their 90s. And she told me once, twice, 3 times, that if Roy ever wanted to make love, that she never said no. I said, Ann, are you kidding me? And she said, no, I never said no. And I will tell you, they had a connection and a bond that I haven't seen in another marriage. Now, I don't think I could do that, but I'm just saying, as I've looked over the years, I mean, I've known them for almost 40 years. They just have a very special bond. So again, don't use sex as a way to punish your husband. And then pardon. You know, R.E.S.P.E.C.T, pardon. And what pardon means is that, you know what, your husband's going to make mistakes. He's going to do things to disappoint you. He's going to make decisions that you're going, why did you do that? But you know what? We are commanded to forgive our husband. God says in Matthew that God forgives us as we forgive others. So if we hold on to bitterness and we hold on to unforgiveness, God can't work. And he also says if we hold unforgiveness and bitterness in our heart, that our prayers are not heard. So if you're having a hard time forgiving your husband for something, really go to the Lord and start to pray and say, Lord, I need to forgive. And I've been married for 33 years, and there have been some decisions that Dirk has made from financial standpoints that I totally disagreed with him, and he did. And I felt like I didn't have to forgive him. But you know what? I believe God allowed those things in our life. I truly believe that now, that God allowed those things in our life because he had to work on me. Because I felt my security was over here, that I didn't need Dirk I had security. So God had to work on my heart and strip me down, and then for me to live in forgiveness. So if your husband's done some things, really go and ask God to help you to forgive, and He will. He will. And go to your husband and say, you know what, honey, I've been holding bitterness and anger or withdrawal or whatever it is, but I really forgive you. I want to walk in forgiveness. Our husbands also need E for encouragement. Your husband may seem like a guy that is self-contained or is somebody who you talk to him and he doesn't even hear you. But I'll tell you, if you start to talk to your husband, even you're talking to somebody else, you know how they just tune you out? You're talking to your husband and he's involved in work or he's doing something, and you say his name, as I used to say, Dirk, and he didn't hear me, and I thought he was ignoring me, but he really couldn't hear me. But the moment I started talking about him in a nice way, it was like his spirit arose and he could hear me. So encouraging words are what brings your husband to life and makes him feel like he has the confidence to be able to be the man that God created him to be. But again, if we're always tearing him down and we're always saying negative things to him, he's going to be believing those lies. So encourage your husband. Give him a vision. Really pray and say, Lord, what are the strengths that my husband has? What are things that you see in him that I don't even see or he doesn't see in himself? Really ask God. And as I started doing that in my marriage, it was amazing how God started giving my husband opportunities that he didn't have when I was always tearing him down. It's amazing how spiritually they change, and then physically they change. So be encouraging. Remember that your husband is like a little boy. He needs to develop courage. He needs to develop strength. I bet when you were dating your husband, you thought he was this strong, incredible man. And now when you see him going through things, you're like, oh my gosh, I thought he was stronger. I thought he could handle more. Have you ever felt that way, where you've kind of looked at your husband and you're going, ooh. But again, we give our husbands the courage. We give them the strength. Encouragement means that we are giving our husbands the courage that they need to go out there and do what they have to do. So believe in him, in his work, in parenting. Don't always be tearing him down about how he's parenting or changing a diaper or feeding your children. Give him that courage that he needs. We need 9 encouraging words to cross out 1 negative, discouraging word. 9 positives to 1 negative. So if you've been tending to nag and complain and always harping on your husband, you're going to have a lot of repairing work to do. Remember, it's going to take 9 times to 1. So just start a little at a time and write it down. Write down the date today and start to be intentional about giving your husband courage and encouragement, and go back to it in 3 months and see if there's a difference. Every woman I've ever talked to has seen a difference. Every single woman. So do it. You will see the change. And 6, connection. For many of us, it's hard to connect with our husbands after we get married and after we have children. We're tired. We have all these little kids hanging on us all day. Our husbands have the pressure of work. We're working, and there's not a lot of time for connection. So we're just like roommates. You know, oh, did you pay the bills? Did you take out the trash? Well, okay, we have to get the kids here. Oh, I'm out of diapers. Oh, I need to go to the market. And we're just like roommates living in a house. And before you know it, a year can pass or 2 years. So we have to be intentional about connection. That's why we talked last week about what are those relationship builders, those marriage builders. Connection is a big one. So we have to be intentional. Come up with ways to connect with your husband. Think about ways you connected before you were married. And if you're busy with life right now, connection may just be sitting on the couch and having connection and talk time until you can rebuild. Because a lot of times our marriages are at some really bad places. where we're going, I don't even know how to start. So it can just start where you're just sitting down with your husband, and he might even say to you, which Dirk would say to me years before, oh, so you're talking to me again? Now maybe that's never happened to you, but you know, it happens where we were just passing in the night, and so I would intentionally sit down beside him. He may be doing something, and he would just, and I go, you know what, honey, I don't want any discouragement and anything between us. I want to start to rebuild. So if you're in that place, start to rebuild. You make that first step. So however you need to connect. And again, connection might be having sex. Connection may be where your husband wants a home-cooked meal. Connection may be where you're sitting next to him, or you're listening to about his work. How many times my husband would come home and I'm like, I don't want to hear about his work. And I would tune him out. Guess what? He knows I've tuned him out. So I have really intentionally tried to do this. When Dirk talks to me, I listen for understanding. What is he really trying to say? Instead of listening just to respond to get it over with. And we had a conversation this morning. He's going through a very difficult business situation right now that has been really heavy on his mind, and he's been very distracted. And I have been trying to be very intentional over the last month to really listen for understanding. And he said to me this morning, he said, you know what, I can't thank you enough for talking this through with me. I really feel like you've been listening to me. Now, he doesn't always say that to me, but I was intentional about really listening to what he was trying to say. And now he's got all these meetings that he's got to do. I feel like he has the courage and the confidence now to be able to go and do what he had to do, versus him sitting here and going, oh yeah, you know, what time do you want to have dinner? Or wait, we have to do this, we have to do that. He doesn't feel like I hear him. And our husbands need to be able to talk to us. And if we don't let him in, he'll go talk to somebody else. So be intentional with that connection. And then that brings us to T, which is time. Again, I know you're tired. You have been pulled all day with all these kids. If you have to take a nap during the day, if you have to do less activities, you know, we always have a saying in Home Club, if you don't know what you're having for breakfast in the morning, you're not going to have dinner at night. And if you don't know you're having sex in the morning, you're not going to have sex at night. We have to prepare for those things. So be intentional about what you can do to be available time-wise to your husband. Your kids don't have to be running around like crazy kids where the only thing they remember you saying, hurry up, let's go, we're late. So be intentional about that time. Remember from the talks before, we speak different languages. We use a lot more words. Sometimes connection might be just sitting with your husband and not being so talkative. You might want to say to your husband, if he's not an emotional guy, when he walks in the door and you're having he's transitioning and then you're sitting down with talk time, you can kind of say, you know, on a scale of, 1 to 10, how was your day? So there's a lot of things that you can come up with that can help you to be more intentional about creating him as your priority in your life. So there's a lot more that we can talk about, but we'll be talking about these in the months to come. I want to leave you with what your homework is this week. If you don't do your homework, you're not affecting change. So please do your homework. Be intentional about respecting your husband. No nagging or complaining. So if you're not nagging and complaining your husband this week and being less than esteeming, you are to have a 3x5 card or on your notes to make a little dash every time you do it. And then next week, when you listen to the video again, you are to calculate how many times did you nag and complain and be really disrespectful to your husband. Because you're going to be amazed at how much more you do it than you think. And then if you continue to do this, I will guarantee you in a month or so, your husband's going to go, wow, you're different. What have you been doing? It happens to every woman who does it because it's God's way. So then you're to actively pursue your husband, keeping in mind the words from the respect, and that's going to be on your handout. And then when you find it difficult, you want to say something or you want to be disrespectful, count to 10, stop, pray, ask the Lord how you can turn that negative comment you want to make into a positive. Because God will start to change your heart. And you know what? As you start to change your heart, you're going to love and respect your husband more. Because what you think is what you become. So I hope you have a great week, and God bless you all.